Good morning. My name is Donnie Wilkerson, a proud Kentucky educator learning every day with 64 wonderful 5th grade students I like to call my grandkids. I'm concerned for them and others as this board contemplates adoption of new social studies standards that, in my opinion, have been crafted injudiciously and without regard to the excellent research on how students learn. I know these are draft standards, but it is their very foundation upon the C3 framework with which I take issue. Our original 2013 group charged with writing new standards was advised that all options were to be considered, including but not limited to C3. Our initial charge going forward was to work first on a scope and sequence, review relevant documents, and then to share ideas electronically in advance of a standards writing retreat at Barren River State Park in June of last year. Upon gathering at Barren River, we were informed that the new standards must be based on C3, that no scope and sequence was needed, and that we were to begin immediately writing standards without any regard to what part of history, notwithstanding whether Kentucky, U.S., or world would be envisioned or at what grade level. You can imagine the consternation and chaos that ensued, and of course the outcome of this retreat proved sorely lacking. At one point, the social studies consultant for Oklahoma, speaking to us via video conference, was prohibited from even answering a question as to why his state had chosen not to use the C3 in its new standards. The follow-up meeting here in July, though better organized but still surreal in nature, did then allow for discussion of scope and sequence, but insisted on the C3 premise. The work of this original standards writing group, now referred to as the Vision Team, was then virtually scrapped, and a new group of teachers selected in May of this year to write in June the draft, ostensibly to be more in line with the vision of folks in the department and academia, rather than that of our original group, the standards you have before you today. These standards adopt almost whole cloth the C3 framework and are virtually devoid of any substantive content. They are instead filled with high-sounding edu jargon that envisions students learning all they need to know about geography, history, government, and economics using an inquiry-based discovery learning approach that ignores the excellent pedagogical research. Published peer-reviewed studies involving thousands of students clearly show the superior effectiveness of strong, teacher-led, explicit instructional methods over the constructivist approach exclusively relied upon in C3, especially at the elementary and middle levels. To an even greater extent than the NGSS, these draft standards will leave education professionals scrambling to figure out what students are expected to learn and when, and will be virtually impossible to assess in any reliable or valid manner. In the 3 minutes I have, it's impossible to apprise the litany of problems associated with not just the process by which these standards came to be, but more importantly with the draft product you have before you. I will send to each of you later today electronic copies of supporting documents along with an extended version of my remarks. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have now or in the future, and I'm more than willing to help in any way to ensure the adoption of workable, research-based standards. I thank you for your time and your service to this great state.
Okay, so as a teacher, looking at these standards, and you're a social studies teacher in elementary school, do these standards provide you the information you need to know what's going to be on the test?
No, they're not. They're not assessment driven at all, and that's one of the problems we've had with standards for so long. They haven't been based on, they've not been assessment driven, and that leaves teachers not knowing what they're supposed to teach. Yeah,
do you see a problem where a student in a school with a good teacher will get a good grounding in history regardless of the vagueness of these standards, whereas a student in a school system with weak teachers is unlikely to get a good grounding in history?
I think with these standards, students are unlikely to get a grounding in historical basics no matter what, because there's no guidance. There's absolutely no guidance. Now, as far as the questioning strategies, as far as a lot of the things that C3 has in it, it's all good sounding things. And at the high school level, maybe as a senior in high school, but there has to be foundational knowledge. There's no basics. You can't have a discussion about the perspective on the Gettysburg Address if you don't know who Abraham Lincoln is and what the Civil War was all about. And before that, the Revolutionary War came before the Civil War. You know.
Do you find it bothersome? Do you find it bothersome that these standards, in fact, don't mention the word war anywhere, or the word river, or some of these other things that
yes.
I think maybe you'd want in a social studies document?
Probably there needs to be more specifics, but I do understand the idea of curriculum versus content. They want to get us into that trap, and I do know the difference between curriculum and content. And I'm not looking for specific things, although the word river might need to be in there somewhere. But what I think you really need to see is a scope and sequence, that at least there's some idea that Kentucky history is going to be taught in 4th grade, and American history at 5th, and then again at 6th, and maybe world history, and there's some delineation as to when and where, so there's some consistency across the board. If you're going to use inquiry-based tactics and discovery learning tactics, those are okay as part of a teacher's toolkit, but not the only tool in the box. At the highest levels, inquiry-based instruction, problem-based learning, this constructivist approach, and that argument's been going on for years in this business, but the studies show clearly that at the elementary level, Piaget's knowledge of how we learn is still very, very much apropos, and that's not being looked
So
at.
you're saying that pushing, and we've heard this with the Common Core stage standards and the science standards as well, you're saying that by doing a top-down design, which apparently was done starting with the end product coming out of high school as the starting point, and then trying to push stuff down to the lower grades, that we pushed higher level skills too low into the curriculum, or too low in the grade level structure?
Yes, higher level skills are wonderful. My students were standing this week on a continuum, on what I call a vote with your feet, where Columbus is a zero, Columbus is a hero. We did that in my 5th grade classroom, but at least I knew that understanding the period of time, 1492, was something that we were to address in 5th grade. Now, I did choose to do it in the fashion that they are seeing in the standards.
Well, of course, Columbus isn't in these standards either, but that's...
I understand that, and
now that you mention that.
And of course, I teach both sides of Columbus. I teach mainly that Columbus was more on the 0 scale.
Do you see a potential, because important events and important individuals, for example, Martin Luther King and the marches he led back when we were having serious civil rights problems, the fact that that's not specifically mentioned or required, do you think that in some school systems in this state, especially this state, being a southern state, that will mean that type of material will be omitted completely?
I have that fear very much so. And again, from that standpoint, is the liberal Zen approach that those kinds of things, that the true story of the treatment of Native Americans could lose some of its luster because it's not required. So yes, it works both ways. History, perspective, there needs to be both perspectives, but there has to be some guidance as to at least the time frame, the scope, and the sequence. That's the two things that have really bothered me most about this process.
Question: have you talked to your colleagues both in your own school system and elsewhere?
Yeah.
Is your opinion shared by a notable number of other history teachers or social studies?
It seems to be universal, but most people. I'm coming at this from alternative route certification. I was in business for nearly 30 years. I was the mayor of Jamestown for 5 years. I don't really. I appreciate these people. They are doing a wonderful job, but I'm not intimidated by government. So I'm not. They may fire me for coming up here. I don't know. I feel like I do a good enough job that that's not going to happen. If you just read these standards, and all these people read them, they're saying, yeah, those sound really cool, But are they substantive? Will that young teacher that graduates from Western Kentucky University that's going to be a social studies teacher, is she going to walk into her 5th grade classroom and have a clue what she's supposed to do? Now, yes, we can have PL, we can have PD, we can have trainings, we can do all that, and that's wonderful.
PD is professional development.
Yeah, I was using PL, of course, because that's the new...
Professional learning. I just want to get that for some of the people who may hear this, they may not know that.
Of course, you want to really protect it now, you need to stay around. You don't have a topic about things, you have a meeting around things. You notice that's the common lingo. So.
That's it. Well, I don't know. I don't know if I'll speak for many people in this room, but I think I'll speak for a lot of people in Kentucky when I say that I salute your courage, and I also am pleased to see that we have people coming into the education system from alternative certification who weren't grown up in the education schools with the education school mentality, who do see problems and are willing to speak out about it.